I would like to hand over to Liam Stent from Matillion, our hosts, who's going to speak about Maia.
Right, hello. Matt did allude to this earlier, so I am very much the imposter in the room here tonight. So yeah, apologies, I am definitely not Julian, as you can see by that photo. I am not a chief of AI, and I'm not going to talk to you, at least explicitly, about how we used evals with Maia. But I am Liam Stent, I do work at Matillion, and I have had the kind of privilege of being involved alongside Julian in building out Maia from day one. So I will talk to you to try and keep somewhat to the theme on how we are measuring Maia now, and from vibes to data, just to quote one of our engineers on how we were previously measuring Maia. But yeah, please do bear in mind, I am not Julian, I am not a chief of AI. So apologies in advance if anything is a bit high level and a little bit not as technical as the two previous talks. So what we're going to go through, I'm going to introduce you to Maia, just very quickly to show you all kind of why we at Matillion are so excited for that. We'll talk a little bit about our kind of journey, measuring Maia, and very much similar stuff as to what Brad's just spoken through actually in terms of a couple of concepts there, which will be good. And then very quickly at the end, we did to try and give some aspect of what's kind of my more natural aspect. We give a little bit of background of some of the kind of lessons learned at Matillion of how we have gone from being a very traditional software engineering shop to embracing kind of the skill sets of data scientists and MLOps engineers, and being able to hopefully kind of make our collective products far better as a result of that. So diving in, what is Maia? So Maia is a digital data engineer, and more specifically, Maia is a team of digital data engineers. And it ultimately aims, similar as coding agents aim to help software engineers become wildly more productive. We think that Maia helps data engineers become wildly more productive. So Maia runs on top of the Data Productivity Cloud, which is ultimately the kind of data management platform that Matillion has built over the years, and that pays for this amazing office and things like that we have here today. And Maia started off, I think someone mentioned earlier, everyone started with a chatbot and things like that, and Maia very much just started as a co-pilot kind of interface into the DPC. And over the last kind of 12 months or so, it's absolutely morphed into kind of the core interface into the DPC, and kind of the way that we believe in Matillion all kind of human data engineers are going to work, and more pressingly at the moment, kind of how actual other AI agents are going to interact with Matillion as well. And the reason why Julian's not here today is because he's in San Francisco today at Snowflake, who are one of our major partners in the data world. They've launched their Snowflake Intelligence solution, and we're very much going to be a partner of that with Snowflake Intelligence agents, being able to talk to Maia and hopefully solve all your data needs. So yeah, Julian gets to be in San Francisco, and I'm here in Manchester today. So yeah, that shows the pecking order of it at Matillion at the moment, that's for sure. So yeah, Maia ultimately, it makes data engineers more productive. It builds pipelines, it builds connectors, which are pretty critical if you're going to load any data. It helps analyze root cause analysis of issues in your pipelines. It helps to document your pipelines, because data engineers, just like software engineers, do not like writing documentation. So it does all of that for you, and we ultimately believe that, Maia is a way of supercharging your kind of power users and also lowering the barrier to entry for kind of AI native professionals with access to data being able to do something with that data. And Matillion is absolutely all in on Maia being the future of how people are going to build, manage, and kind of scale data pipeline. So that's just a little bit about Maia. I will very quickly just give a few almost kind of architecture slides, so apologies in advance for some of them. You can see here basically what Maia does is it ultimately takes a prompt from a user. It integrates with various different elements via AWS Bedrock. We're currently using Sonnet 4.5. We have a bit of Haiku in there as well. And we also have some Nova in there, very strangely, for some very simple tasks. But it is kind of a mix of models which we're using for various different tools. And ultimately what Maia does is using, as it says there at the bottom, the semantic layer, which is kind of a knowledge graph. It ultimately produces DPL, which is in the top right corner there, that kind of YAML-based file, which is kind of Matillion's file format that ultimately underpins a data pipeline. So as you can see there, it's very human readable, it's very easy to edit, it's very easy to understand. It was a concept which didn't exist kind of 2 years ago, and therefore when all the original kind of first kind of pass of the kind of mainstream LLM models came out, They never knew what DPL was. They weren't trained on that in any way. They had absolutely no concept of what a data pipeline language was. And ultimately, that ended up being a really good thing for us, to be honest, because it meant we could get very focused on how we were trying to educate it on what a great data pipeline looked like. So, say user enters a prompt into a prompt box of what they're trying to do with their data pipeline, or what they're trying to do to build their connector, or what they're trying to do to do whatever they want to do in their data pipeline. It produces DPL. DPL ultimately gets displayed as the kind of GUI image at the bottom there underneath, which is kind of the low-code kind of interface that has been Matillion's kind of mainstay from its kind of early days. It's always been a low-code, no-code platform. And again, we believe that while the DPL file is super readable, we think that's part of Maia's success, is it's a kind of another layer of abstraction to hopefully explain to a less technical user exactly what's going on with their data pipeline after Maia's been able to interpret that into DPL. So yeah, I think that's just another, again, classic architecture slide. I won't go through too much of it. The only probably semi-relevant thing on that is you can see these kind of different agents that we have at the top there. That's kind of the way that when we talk about Maia being a team of digital data engineers, you can see there's multiple agents depending on your persona that you're trying to do, which we believe Maia is able to support you for. And yeah, everything else, a little bit of detail of how Matillion, the data productivity cloud, works, connecting to sources, transformations, all that kind of bread and butter stuff like that for any data integration platform. Okay, so I will quickly skip over that though. Again, not going to go into too much detail on this. You can tell already this audience definitely knows kind of how an agentic system works. Maia's no different than any other system. Loops round, lots of different tool calls for lots of different purposes, ultimately trying to end up with the outcome you're trying to get, in most cases, say, a DPL to represent a data pipeline. Probably what is maybe interesting and sort of more specific to Matillion, we have, this one here. Maia has full use of kind of the same things that a human being would have, a human data engineer. It gets access to component validation, which, say, is the way that Matillion or Data Productivity Cloud validates that a pipeline almost compiles, and it's able to utilize that to know, okay, this pipeline now compiles, my DPL is kind of valid from that perspective. And it also gets to sample the data as that pipeline is being built out, and again, it will use the sample data to be able to validate what it should do next based on the context of what you're trying to provide it with. And we will talk a little bit later on of some of the trouble that the sampling data got us into from a PII perspective and a few different factors like that. Okay, so that's like a very quick background of Maia, and say we launched that in June 2025. I did mean to start with apologies for no more Pokemon pictures, and I only had 2 memes rather than Daisy's many memes before. So this is your lot for memes, I'm afraid, on this slide. But it did launch in June 2025, say at Snowflake Summit. It was without doubt the best product launch I've ever been involved in. We're a products company at Matillion, that's what we do, and all of them are successful in various different ways. Maia definitely felt different. We have a very, I would say, cynical product director. Literally never seen him happy in my life. He was at Snowflake Summit and I said to him, is it as good as everyone's telling me it is? And he went, it's pretty good, which from Gwendol kind of means it's absolutely amazing. And there's another example there. Julian was at Snowflake Summit over in Vegas. I didn't get the invite there either. So it really is 2 standards for Julian getting to do all the good gigs while I get to stay here. But it was amazing. It produced these things that we called kind of Maia moments. And these are kind of those moments of kind of wow from our customers to go, oh, actually this works, or actually this is better than I was expecting it to be, or actually I can see how this is going to fundamentally change the way that my data engineers work, or my need to potentially even hire more data engineers in the future. And that was fantastic, but we needed to go from those Maia moments to ultimately big enterprise customers giving us hundreds of thousands of pounds to run this in production. And it was at that point where a little bit before that, because we kind of hoped it was going to be successful, we knew we really needed to pivot from a focus perspective of it's not just about building features, it's not just about shipping some pretty cool demos. We needed to actually make sure it worked. So say, that, as Harold is showing there, this is where one of our best engineers, best and brightest, we were discussing whether we felt it was good enough to probably go from maybe 3.7 to 4 of Sonnet, and he uttered the line of, based on my vibes, I think we're good to go, which was a good line at the time, but yeah, obviously is not going to work that well when people are paying us, say, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we need to be able to answer all the previous questions we had before on the previous talks. So it was at that point where we kind of really started to get very focused on how we were going to measure Maia. It was at that point where we started to hire more data scientists. We always had Julian involved. We always had other members of Julian's team, but we knew we needed to hire more. We needed to hire more MLOps engineers. We needed to really start taking this seriously as a first-class citizen of what we were delivering at Matillion. So we have a value here at Matillion since day one, which is to innovate and demand quality. And it has that tagline of no product, process, or person is ever finished. And we very much used that to kind of drive how we were going to go about measuring Maia. So as you can see there with the world's worst diagram to show a phase that we've gone across, that it looks even worse on a big screen than it does on a small screen. So apologies for that. That was definitely a last minute addition. We really did try and start super simple. We then got a little bit more structured, a little bit more automated to ultimately where we are today. And I think the kind of tagline of the value of no process ever being complete is absolutely valid as to where we are now. We've not cracked this in any way, shape, or form. We're still right at the start of our journey on how we're doing this, but we're trying to take it seriously and we're trying to hire some great people, some of which are in the room at the moment, to be able to help us do this in a far more controlled way. So we are maturing, we're getting more confidence in what Maia does. We're at a very, very early stage of the journey and kind of completely embracing that and how we're doing it. So where did we start? We did start, after saying we did it all after that guy said we should do it on vibes, we did start much, much earlier, just to show the kind of true, very simple way which we kind of tried to do it. And I think Brad spoke about this a little bit more earlier of very much trying to constrain the output, very simplistic. So the first thing that we tried to do in order to get any confidence with how to test a non-deterministic system in a very kind of traditional software engineering house is we used one of our AI prompt components, which is a way of building an AI integration into a data pipeline, and we fed it our certification for our exam. And a few of the models failed it, interestingly. A few of the models passed it. And what that actually helped us really do, the kind of key things that we took away from that, it was giving us confidence of how to use things like RAG in our pipeline, how to make sure that models that previously had absolutely no understanding what DPL was or what the data productivity cloud was, or in some cases what Matillion was, how we were able to feed that, say, with kind of our own internal docs or our public sites, and how we were to make that kind of useful and kind of valuable to a large language model. So yeah, we definitely kind of went ahead from that perspective. And then next up, we then got slightly more complex and structured. And again, Brad definitely didn't check our notes before because we used the LLM as a judge and an AI judge. So ultimately at this point was when we started to actually measure what Copilot, as it was called then before our marketing team got involved, but now Maia, was actually producing in terms of data pipelines. So what we did here was, very similar to what we've spoken about before. Ultimately, we started to have a judge, an AI judge, be able to measure the kind of outcome of a pipeline. And that's pretty difficult to do because even in a non-Gen AI world, you can build a pipeline in many different ways. You can just shove it in a Python script and it will probably produce the same output as a nicely constructed, kind of well-maintained, kind of explainable pipeline built out with many different components. So we had to try and, by using reference data, millions or thousands of pipelines that we had available to us as to what good DPL was and what good pipelines were, we had to try and teach an AI judge as to what a successful pipeline should be. And ultimately, to begin with, we very much had a manual kind of human in the loop to be able to both rate the answer, to be able to provide their own counterpoints as to what that answer was, and to be able to ultimately understand how much confidence did we have in an LLM's ability to judge the output of what Maia did based on a set of input kind of scenarios of varying degrees of quality to give us confidence that what we were producing was kind of working from that perspective. So I think it was at this point, where we started to actually find which of the models worked far better for us than others, which of the models that we were more comfortable in to act as a judge. And also I think similar to the point made before, we definitely found that there was bias amongst the families of models. So using a completely different model in order to evaluate rather than the one that was sort of behind the scenes at Maia was one of kind of the early learnings we had from that perspective. So then, moving on with our kind of terrible picture framework of simple, structured, automated, once we were kind of semi-confident in kind of what we were doing, it was then around, as software engineers, building it into our pipelines and being able to run that in a far more automated way, a far more scalable way, and ultimately a way which we were able to kind of keep up with the pace of which we were trying to iterate at. So, ultimately, we put this into kind of a test framework which interface, with Maia via a set of APIs rather than kind of the core tool We'd run it on lots of different builds. We'd run it on lots of different deploys. We'd try and have this bank, which again, I think was mentioned as well by Bradney before, like this bank of questions, this bank of prompt changes, and be able to make sure each and every time we were validating as we were changing a prompt, as we were giving it a different context file, as we were giving it a different set of kind of references as to what good DPL looks like, how was that impacting on the quality of Maia as an output. And I think it was at this stage where we started to get pretty, I'd say, well, a lot more confident with what we were doing and a lot more kind of aware as to kind of the consequences of some of the actions we were making. No coincidence that this was the time we also started to hire MLOps engineers into the team, data scientists into the team, and started to really kind of embrace that cross-functional kind of aspect of the team from that side of things. A kind of a big success at this point was when Sonnet 4.5 came out, or when it was available via Bedrock, because that did take a little bit of time to work its way through AWS. We were ultimately able to upgrade with a high degree of confidence within 24 hours, which we saw as a very much a positive compared to the time and effort and the vibes-based decision we made from going from 3.7 to 4 to be able to show our stakeholders, this is the testing we've done, this is the sort of results that our judge was giving us before, this was the results our judge was giving us after, this is why we're confident of releasing it. It was a big change, I think, for the company and the confidence of how we were measuring Maia, rather than just saying, this is good, just go and sell it and ship it. And obviously, that aligned at a time when we were, say, selling to more enterprise customers, selling to more customers who were asking us very valid questions about how can I trust this output when you're telling me to offload this task that a human was doing over to Maia now. So I think there's possibly a couple of slides in here now. Yeah, so this is just a bit of an example of the kind of scenario, one of the scenarios that we would give the test harness. You can see here Maia literally talking to itself in terms of the conversation it was having with the AI judge, and just a little bit of output there in terms of kind of reasoning scores and kind of some context behind why it gave certain answers. And ultimately, again, this is exactly what our teams are working through now to find out where we have the patterns of things working better and things not working as well. So that was kind of our almost kind of technical aspect of how we were measuring Maia. The next phase we put in, if you remember back to the terrible diagram, was kind of measuring it. So we knew that we wanted to be able to run this at a much kind of bigger scale. Again, sorry, the picture there is pretty terrible, so apologies for that, but that is Langfuse. That is a set of dashboards in Langfuse there with the automated output that we're running, say, on many of our builds and on many of our kind of test cycles. All of that output is now going into Langfuse as kind of a central LLM observability platform. So this allows us, say, not only to be able to monitor and track kind of scores and kind of time taken, tokens used, cost, all of that good stuff, but also it's very powerful if those haven't used it yet in terms of being able to go down into individual traces, the individual tool calls that have been made. And ultimately, the most important thing that I think we find it for now is when the score drops significantly, or when there's a variation in the time taken, or on some kind of output from Maia, our software engineers use that just like any other debugging tool to be able to go in and work out what's happened, work out how a change that we've made as part of the development cycle has negatively impacted it, and then be able to ultimately obviously make Maia better or more consistent from that perspective. So again, a similar mindset of they don't really like it when it all comes out and looks nice in straight lines. They like it when things go wrong because that's how we're able to learn from it. And I think us trying to, again, normalize how we have loads of different test frameworks and test tools and Matillion for traditional software engineering, we needed to find something like this where we could explain to people, this is how we're testing an LLM output as part of what we're doing with Maia, in the same way we have, I don't know, Cypress dashboards or Postman tests or X, Y, and Z from that perspective, which we've done for many, many years. So this is kind of where we're at the moment in terms of our kind of measuring journey. One thing which is worth saying here is when we started to kind of store kind of trace specific information and run specific information, our AppSec team got really scared really quickly because they suddenly realized that not only were we storing the prompt information, which we were sort of doing all the way along, but at this point, a few slides back, I spoke about sampling data to be able to work out what move to do next as part of the kind of agentic loop. Langfuse was now storing the sample data. Now, sample data in the pipelines that we run, there's lots of PII in there. There's lots of data that we don't want to be able to see and that we don't want with that. So it was very easy for us to be able to redact the kind of sample data. That was quite straightforward for us to be able to set up. What we then discovered, though, was Maia was using that, almost inferring information and remembering information from the sampled data in order to make a decision way further down the line in terms of the kind of loop that it was on and the task it was trying to complete. And as part of its kind of sharing its rationale about why it made a certain tool call, it was referring back to that sampled data. So we were kind of, even though we were doing our best to remove it, we were very much still being able to have access to that sampled data, which, scared our security team an awful lot. So we did have to add in, I think in the end we went with, what's the AWS service? Comprehend, I think is what it's called. And we kind of added that in, say, both to be able to get the sample data out initially, but then more prevalently for us, kind of the later references to that sample data to be able to strip that out and make sure that we could have confidence that, say, we're able to understand what was happening without interfering on our kind of PII requirements. Okay, so I think, final slide, because I know we're probably running out of time. So I did say to Matt that I'd just do one extra slide than what Julian was planning on talking about, which was just some of our experiences of, say, kind of integrating together, I suppose, different skill sets in different domains, like many of the people here today, with what Matillion's often been, which is just a Java software engineering shop. So I think we spoke about before how kind of we don't try and overcomplicate things like that terrible diagram and kind of iterate and learn as we go. And we just did this for this as well. Like, we just treated it like any other cross-functional team. At Matillion, we have back-end engineers, front-end engineers, UX designers, manual testers, automation testers, SREs. We just added in MLOps or data science as an additional discipline of those teams where it was needed. Don't treat it as anything any different. Kind of just make sure if there's work to be done to make your product or make your features good, it was just treated as work on a backlog. And I think we did explain to certain stakeholders kind of, this is a different skill set, this is the sort of work that they will do. But these are things that had never been discussed at Matillion before. People didn't realize why we needed to spend engineering cycles making things better without adding new functionality to it. So I think there was a bit of education there on the sort of work that would happen, but then very quickly a normalization of, this is just work to make Maia better. We can build new features, and we can make it more repeatable, make it more consistent, and we can evidence to our customers why we think Maia is performing in the way it should be performing. So I think that was the number one thing that we're, again, still very much trying to go through, but we're just normalizing it being like any other aspect of the team. And then, say one giant backlog, one roadmap, one stand-up, one kind of discussion of priorities. If it's important, we'll do it. If it's not important, we won't do it. There's loads of good ideas. There's an infinite amount of time, or not an infinite, the opposite of an infinite, whatever, a finite amount of time that we've got to do work. So we just say we didn't treat it any differently. We didn't say we always need to have this work going. We're saying if it's important enough work, we'll collectively do it. If it needs a mix of software engineers and MLOps engineers, that's what we do. If we need to bring in SRE, we bring in SRE. It's just work just to make Maia go better. And I think the other thing that we found as like a kind of a nice kind of consequence of this stuff, with just like when we've introduced kind of SRE into kind of our delivery teams, or back-end engineers wanting to have a little go at some front-end work and things like that. The exact same thing happened here. Like, great engineers want to work with other great engineers. And we found that lots of our engineers that are working on Maia, they wanted to learn from people who we were bringing into the organization with these different skill sets. And we've really encouraged that kind of T-shaped style to say, well, yeah, that's absolutely fine. You might have a software engineering job title, but you work on a product where understanding this MLOps stuff is important. So spend a bit of time and spend some cycles being able to embrace yourself in that, with ultimately the desire of the more that you can do without handing over to the expert, the more the expert can really do the kind of deep value add work. So I think that is everything that we wanted to go through. So any questions from anybody on that?
I think just time for perhaps one question, if that's all right, but then we can carry on afterwards. Who wants to? No one wants to dare jump in now. Fair enough. Oh, here we go.
Thank you. I just want to understand a bit of the history of this Maia, when it was started, and then underlying technology, looking at what you're using now on a LangFuse and Langsmith and everything else, and like on the AWS Bedrock you're using, and then using LLMs like and Sonnet. So is it like built on top of LangChain as in for agentic workflow, or is it something else you're using like in-house?
So we started building Maia as it is today. Good question. Kind of probably mid-2023, possibly. Like, we were quite early on in terms of kind of wanting to kind of try and build something out. So it kind of went for a few iterations, to say, as like a pretty generic co-pilot kind of service before it kind of really became agentic and kind of spread its wings far wider than just building pipelines like it is today. It's all built on kind of Spring AI as like an underlying framework underneath. And kind of the rest of it, we very much, it is quite literally 4 software engineers who built kind of Maia from the ground up across this time, supported by the likes of Julian and say kind of now a growing army of people as the company kind of real shifts towards it. So it was very much built from a homegrown perspective. It was very much built on some of those Matillion values we spoke about of kind of innovating and kind of learning as we're going along. So yeah, that's kind of the kind of journey as to where it's got to. So say super small team, kind of timed it well with the Data Productivity Cloud, which launched kind of 12 months prior to that. Previously, we had a very kind of on-premise product, which would not have worked anywhere near as well. It didn't have a nice readable format like DPL. So there was a few things that worked really well timing-wise for us. But yeah, then after that, ultimately, some very hard work by some very clever individuals and ultimately learning quickly as kind of the ecosystem evolved and what used to be hard for them suddenly became easier. And yeah, definitely, they definitely did have a bit of a mindset of, or kind of a general rule of, if something doesn't work now, give it kind of 3 months and let's hope that the models catch up and we become more efficient and proficient in the way that we're kind of integrating with those models to allow us to do it. And so far, so good. Yeah, we're definitely excited about it.
Thank you.